Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video will be a two-part series. First part's going to be removal and installation of the diff. Second part's going to be rebuild of the diff, all new bearings and seals. So jumping into that, so just so you guys have a bit of an idea as to what's coming up on part two, we replaced every bearing in the diff. There is no actual specs online or in the manual stating what your pinion bearing preload should be or your backlash settings. So myself and my dad have set this up based on knowledge of ourselves being diesel mechanics and having previously rebuilt multiple diffs ourselves, my old boy more so than me. But we did run into a few dramas, such as the Land Rover do not sell the collapsible spacer for your pinion separately at all. There's not even a listing for it. So we had a bit of a hurdle that we had to jump over there, as well as I stupidly damaged one of the new bearings, and none of the bearing places that I called up in Australia even had a listing for that bearing. So luckily for me, I had to do a 3-hour round trip to Leo, who you all know I use for all my Land Rover parts. He previously had rebuilt the diff and just done the carrier bearings and not the pinion. So luckily I just drove down there and grabbed his spare bearing from the pinions. Was a challenge. This is the first time I've called the old boy up just to run his eye over what I'm doing, and I needed some backup on what I should do without finding a new collapsible spacer. Luckily he came up with a good solution. So stay tuned for part two, but for now this is how you remove the diff. Alright, so first things first, plan of attack is get the front up on stands, remove front wheels, remove front CV shafts, both sides, and front drive shaft, and then it's a matter of you remove the axle tube from the diff, separate that before pulling it. Apparently it's a lot easier that way, and then it's 4 mounting bolts and the diff center should fall down. Sounds good in theory. Let's get to it. Alright guys, so that's both left and right hand CV shafts, alright, on the floor. That process, because I've done this a few times now, has that only took me half hour to do both sides. So you don't really need much, just your general stuff. If you want to know more on the CV removal and install, there's actually a video on my page about it, so just go hit that up. Otherwise, I'm sure the time warp's given you enough info for you to get a rough idea of what you want to do. Now we're just going to go, I'm going to unbolt that axle tube from the diff, which is where the right hand CV slides into, and then work on the diff mounts and the diff breather. And I'll drop that on the floor, and then I'm going to be looking at maybe putting this car back on the wheels. So just bolting up my suspension parts again real quick, and pushing it into the driveway so that if it does decide to rain, because there's some bad weather coming, I can close my garage door. But yeah, definitely need a shed because this is getting old real quick. But hopefully I think there'll be a fair few on here that can relate to this struggles of the real world, eh? Yeah, hopefully it has aircon too, because I sweat a lot. Alright guys, so that's the diff out. So, in all fairness, it was actually really easy to get out. The only thing you got to be careful of is your diff breather tube. But, so you got three 24mm bolts here. An 18mm bolt here. And that's it for your diff mounts. Once you've separated your axle tube. So your axle tube just comes here like this. You got four 13mm head bolts bolting the axle tube to the diff, and then you've got a 15mm bolt here, which is your other end of the diff mount, which you have to hold with a spanner on the other side, which is 13mm. So once you pull the axle tube off, it's easy. The only thing I found out, as you've seen later on, was I had to pull this cross member off, which is also another easy job. 18mm all around, and that pops straight out of the way. And the only other thing to be careful of is this oil pressure level sensor. So the diff comes really close to that, and I'll probably pull this drive shaft out of the way just to make my life easier, because it actually got caught on that trying to come out. But apart from that, this is quite an easy diff to pull. Obviously not solid axle diff spec, but pretty happy with it. In regards to the diff itself, you would have seen on the time lapse I've separated it, which is nice for the front diffs because you don't have adjustments or anything like that to worry about. However, you can see by mine it's not very healthy looking. It's definitely had water in there, and as you can see, these bearings are absolutely fingered, well and truly. All the hard facings come off of them. So this is another reason why when you're driving and you take your foot on and off the throttle, you get a bearing knock. It's real common for these carrier bearings to fail, and you get look at the play I've got in that. So I'm really happy I've separated this diff before I got to the point that I had to change it. Now the only other scenarios that I'm worried about is this pinion bearing. I cannot find specs at all for this bearing. I don't know how to set it up. I'm gonna have a look in the manual. I really do want to find the specs because this does feel light. It's only got 0.3 to 0.5 of a kilo of drag, and it's not really, I don't know, to me, it's got no play in it, but it just doesn't feel right. So I'm going to try look into that now and see what I come up with. Alright guys, that's it for part one. Unfortunately I have run out of time to edit part two, so I'll be doing that when I get home from work, when I get back from work. Yeah, I'll give you guys a sneak peek of what this pinion bearing looked like, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Alright guys, so check out the state of that bearing. What a mess. That is absolutely fingered. I'm so happy I pulled this apart.